All right, good morning. Can everyone hear me? Okay, great, good. We've been testing the volume, so I want to make sure everyone can hear me. I'm Laura Strickland, Executive Director of the Sylacauga Chamber of Commerce, and we're especially thankful for your attendance this morning. We appreciate you joining us for our monthly Chamber Connections. It's an opportunity for you to network with others in the community, business, and industry. And this month, we're taking a little different turn with our monthly Chamber Connections. We usually host these in the facility of a business or industry. But in order to share with you this Remembrance Day, the library, Tracy Thomas, the director of the library, and her gracious staff have been so hospitable and welcoming us here this morning, and we're so appreciative, Tracy. Thank you for sharing your beautiful facility with us. Just to add, if you have not had an opportunity to tour the library and visit and see all of the different aspects of this community, I hate to even use the word library, Tracy, because you have so many stories to tell here, and your building is beautiful, and you're such a great community partner, and we appreciate you so much. But I hope you take an opportunity to come back and spend some more time with Tracy and her staff here. I hope that following today's presentation, you'll take an opportunity to visit with your friends and possibly meet someone new, which is the purpose of our Chamber Connections, making those connections with others in business and individuals within the community. We want to say a very special thank you to our host for September, Southern States Bank. Our support of the Sylacauga region would not be possible without partners like you at Dennis. I'm speaking with Dennis Elliott, looking at him and your staff and your partners within your organization to allow us to do and fulfill our initiatives for this community in this region. Dennis, would you like to come and say a few words?
Good morning, everyone. On behalf of Southern States Bank and as a board member of the Chamber of Commerce, welcome everyone here today. You know, today as we approach an anniversary, a 20-year anniversary of an event that took place on September 11th, you know, we want to reflect and remember a few things over the past 20 years. First and foremost, we want to remember those innocent citizens of the United States that died on that day. We also want to remember those heroes, those responders that ran to danger that day to protect those civilians when thousands of others were running the other way. Those are our heroes. We also want to remember those servicemen and women of our armed forces that took the fight to the enemy, so they couldn't come here and harm the United States. We also want to remember those servicemen and women that gave the ultimate sacrifice on the altar of freedom for the freedoms that we enjoy today. So let's let freedom ring. So today we're fortunate to have Brigadier General Robert Holmes here to tell us a part of that story. Thank you.
A very special thank you to Mr. Samuel Childs, Director of Sylacauga High School Bands, and to the 2021 SHS Marching Band's Leadership Winds and Percussions. What a beautiful job you did this morning. Thank you so much for joining us.
That two planes flew into the two towers. Be advised, the North Tower is down. All personnel be advised, the North Tower is down.
It is my personal honor to introduce you to our guest speaker this morning, Robert Holmes, Brigadier General, United States Air Force retired. Robert, or Bob as he likes to be called, Holmes is a leader and a senior executive with 4 decades of experience leading organizations ranging from small elite teams to large complex organizations. A Sylacauga native, Bob is a retired Brigadier General with military career in special operations and a combat veteran of Operation Enduring Freedom, Afghanistan, and the Global War on Terror. In 2001, Bob commanded the Air Force Special Operation Command's 720th Special Tactics Group. After the attacks of 9/11, he led the 720th's immediate and historic deployment as part of the Joint Special Operations Forces to conduct combat operations in southern Afghanistan. Other notable assignments include the United States Air Force Director of Security Forces and Force Protection, Air Staff Pentagon, U.S. Central Command Deputy Director of Operations, and Director of the Interagency Task Force for the U.S. Special Operations Command. Bob is a master parachutist and military freefall parachutist. Bob and his wife Colleen, who is here with us this morning, returned to Sylacauga in 2016. I want to personally thank Bob for his service to our country, and a special thank you to your support of our community and of the Sylacauga Chamber of Commerce. Bob, would you join us?
I will. 20 years ago, some folks in the room this morning weren't born yet. Some of the folks in the room were probably young and don't remember the attacks on September the 11th of 2001. But if you are old enough to remember, just think for a minute the thoughts that went through your mind, the thoughts that went through your heart as you became aware or maybe witnessed the attacks on television. So just take a moment to go back to what you can recall. For some, maybe anger. For some, bewilderment, asking the question about how could this happen? What is happening? Why is this happening? Who did this? So just take a moment to reflect on those thoughts that were in your mind that day. Because with the speed of 24/7 news media and the internet, the nation watched, the world watched a horrific attack on the homeland of the United States of America. Other attacks like this, Pearl Harbor or attacks associated with other wars, did not get the audience that this attack got. So you begin to put that into a world stage where not only we as Americans witnessed this, but other nations witnessed what had happened at the hands of an international terror group called Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda commandeered 4 commercial airliners and flew suicide missions into 3 targets and had a 4th planned, probably the White House. And these were going to be suicide attacks on domestic U.S. targets. Osama bin Laden, the name should be familiar to you. UBL is another term that he goes by. UBL was a Saudi Arabian. He was the Al-Qaeda leader and a terror mastermind. From a wealthy family, he financed Al-Qaeda's terror planning and activities well before 9/11. If you recall, the attacks on 9/11 were number 6 in attacks or attempts for hostility directed at the United States. And while UBL and Al-Qaeda were not attributed with all 6, they were connected to the terror planners of those 6. The Yemen hotel bombing in 92, the first World Trade Center attack in a parking garage in 93, in 1998, attacks on 2 U.S. embassies in Africa, killing 224 people, injuring 5,000, and then in 2000, the bombing of the USS Cole, which killed 17 sailors. The point here is that UBL was a determined enemy. Osama bin Laden was a determined terror enemy, and Al-Qaeda a determined terror force. Bin Laden knew Afghanistan. He knew the Taliban. Over a decade earlier, he had fought in Afghanistan with the resistance fighters against the Russians, and in 98, he established a safe haven for himself and Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan near Kandahar. That's where he set up his headquarters. It's just 2 miles remote from the Kandahar airport, and he directed the 9/11 attacks from the Kandahar headquarters and his safe haven. While 9/11 was a shock, it was a shocking tragedy. For some, it may not have been a surprise. Understanding the difference in a shock, and we were all shocked, surprisingly shocked, but in the long view, this attack may not have been a surprise in the long view. Counterterror experts and intel analysts had studied UBL's determination and the intent to conduct the previous hostile attacks. So it was not a matter of would he try again, would Al-Qaeda try again, it was a matter of when. And I know for years we've questioned why didn't we know? And we can get into that in the Q&A later. After the attacks, President Bush, United States government demanded demanded that Afghanistan, the Taliban, turn over the UBL, the al-Qaeda leader. And the Taliban government refused, and on 7 October, the United States and the United Kingdom began bombing operations against Taliban targets and UBL hide sites. So as you might imagine, as my thoughts to share with you and my memory and recollection this morning for 9/11 extended not only on 9/11 or the 11th of September, but then for the next 120 days. On the morning of 9/11, I was at the Hurlburt Field. It's an Air Force base for special ops. At the Hurlburt gym, finishing a morning workout, and I saw the first aircraft, or we saw in breaking news that an aircraft had flown into one of the World Trade Center towers. My first thoughts were, well, this is regrettably some private pilot that got lost or totally confused in his airspace or her airspace, or a news helicopter that had flown into the World Trade Center. Within just a few minutes, I then saw the second aircraft crash into the remaining tower. It was a commercial airliner. So immediately and instinctively, I knew that we were under attack. It was a statement of obvious, but then all of those questions about who, why, what began to come to my mind. I quickly made 2 phone calls, one to Colleen, said, turn the news on, we're going to be going to war. Just again, instinctively, I knew that we would. Second phone call was to the unit, and I put the 720th headquarters on alert, and then eventually asked the staff to gather in the conference room so that we could immediately begin to assess what would be our next actions of the day, of the week, and of months. We put all 4 squadrons that the group had on a 24/7 alert and gave them an instruction to stand by. And it was not long before my parent command, the Air Force Special Operations Command, did the same for the whole command. The airmen of the 720th, the airmen that you see represented there standing in rank and file, are a one-of-a-kind Air Force combat force. These airmen, often called air commandos or battlefield airmen, all trained in the specialties of special operations and to the standard of our joint special operations counterparts, the Army Green Berets or Special Forces, the Navy SEALs, Army Rangers, and Marine Force Recon. Because as we go to operate, as we go to conduct special operations, these joint counterparts would be our battle buddies. Over the next few weeks, we saw what enduring freedom was shaping up to be. My word going forward with our squadrons and teams as they deployed out the door was, for 2 decades, we've trained and we've studied what we were going to do, and what this operation, Enduring Freedom, is going to mean to us is that we're being called to do what we were expected to do, what we trained to do, what we were prepared to do. The United States and UK began aerial bombing on 7 October. Secretary Rumsfeld against Taliban targets. In the meantime, Secretary Rumsfeld was anxiously waiting to get boots on the ground and get combat ground operations started. So on 19 October, the invasion begins. First, with 200 Army Rangers and elements of the 720th Special Tactics Group, our operators parachute into Objective Rhino. It was a desert landing strip probably used by drug lords to transport heroin out of Afghanistan to a world market. In the north, the 1st Green Beret Special Forces A teams with Special Tactics Airmen inserted to link up with Afghan resistance fighters. In the north, moving into a period of October and November, in the north, the Green Berets rallied Karzai's Afghan resistance fighters for rapid movement against the Taliban. The top picture is 720th Special Operator, one of our Master Sergeants, Bart Decker, with the Green Beret horse soldiers. That picture may be familiar to you. For those of you who can remember, it was on the cover of Time magazine weeks after the attacks on 9/11. In the South, a Marine task force led by then Brigadier General Jim Mattis, along with elements of a U.S. Navy SEAL Special Warfare Group and my own headquarters and special tactics teams, operated out of Objective Rhino. And we made the move with the Marines and the SEALs from Rhino into Kandahar later in December. The picture of the blacked out C-130 landing there at the bottom of that slide is reminiscent of my thoughts as I stepped out of our insertion bird at about midnight one dark night. Everything was blacked out, and my immediate thoughts were, what are we going to do with this place? Because my premonition, my questions were, the U.S. now had invaded and forcibly put boots on the ground in another country. So in strategic terms, that meant you own it. And so we can talk about this in the Q&A as well. My thoughts that night had already gone through years of thinking in War College and other studies, knowing that we had to have a strategy now that we owned it. And I in my mind and in my heart said, are we up to this? Moving on into December, U.S. Special Operations Forces, along with the UK and Australian allies, drove the Taliban from power very rapidly. So in less than 90 days, we had driven out the regime government. UBL in December would slip away at Tora Bora in the rugged peaks of the Pakistan border. A lot of folks wanted to know how that could happen. And if you saw the geography of those over 10,000 foot mountain peaks, frozen over most of the time, then you would understand it's a very treacherous and unrelenting piece of terrain. Just before Christmas, the United States government, strategic policymakers, and the administration asked for a robust conventional force to go into Afghanistan. So the 101st Airborne and the 10th Mountain Division began to move toward Afghanistan in late December and began arriving in January. Also in December, we received a warning order for all commanders to begin to plan for an invasion of Iraq. And at that time, I remember standing in our Joint Operations Center, and I won't tell you the explicative words that I used in my mind and my heart about now returning after we had just made way in Afghanistan to now return and begin to discuss war plans for Iraq. And that's something else that you may want to go into in the Q&A. So going beyond memory, past the first 120 days of OEF, the 720th Special Tactics Airmen would continue the hunt for bin Laden along with the Joint Special Operations Forces and would do what was asked in Afghanistan and Iraq. The Department of Defense and the Air Force and our joint warfighting counterparts recognized the 720th impact in the early days of Operation Enduring Freedom. And the Secretary of the Air Force credited the 720th group as being the driving factor, as airmen on the ground, the driving factor in actually creating and writing new Air Force combat doctrine from the battlefield. The 720th Airmen, now the Special Operations 24th Special Ops Wing, have received 1 Medal of Honor, 10 Air Force Crosses, 34 Silver Stars, over 600 Bronze Stars, along with hundreds of Bronze Stars with Valor and Purple Hearts. So this Air Force outfit of what we would often call junkyard dogs is among the most highly decorated units in the United States military and is the most decorated organization in the United States Air Force. So my memory of 9/11 closes with thoughts of having been blessed to lead these great warriors, to lead, in some cases, maybe your sons and daughters brothers, sisters, and I remain in their debt for their courage, their commitment, their selfless sacrifice, not only of the operators, but of the families, and particularly those that gave the ultimate sacrifice. So today we remember 20 years ago, this Saturday, 9/11. And for me, you know, I always ask the why question. Why do we remember? Why should we remember? What should we remember? And that may be different for each one of us. Remember just under the 3,000 folks that died that day in an attack. They didn't get up that morning prepared to die. Their families did not get up that morning and send them off preparing them to die. There's a wall at the 9/11 Memorial in New York City, and the names of all of those that died, both in the buildings and then those first responders that ran toward danger that Dennis talked about. Their names are inscribed on a wall. Each of those names have a face. Each of those names have a family. And for those of us who can still live to talk and think about it, we owe it to those that cannot talk. So that's one thing that comes to mind about remembering 9/11. You know, life was quite different after the attacks. Everything from going to the airports to other security measures for schools and football games and things like that. So it changed, in a way, our social and cultural fabric about the way we would conduct our everyday business as Americans. And it affected other folks around the world in much the same way. It affected business. There are certain businesses that did not quite recover, and then they got hit again in the last 2 years with the pandemic. So it was a day, that attack on the nation, a world superpower, changed life in the world as we know it. Then I think really the most important thing as to why we would remember is that this was an horrific event. So as we speak to tell this story, we need to think about what can we do to avoid this. You might think military leaders and military strategists, go to war is the first option. That's not true. Most military leaders you talk to will try to offer concepts of operation that will not put America's sons and daughters into a battlefield or a battle space because they know the horrific cost of war. The military works for civilian leadership. So policymakers make that decision. So for those that can still talk to our policymakers to say, hey, these kinds of wars may have unintended consequences that we don't count on. So another reason we have determined the why we remember 9/11. So it's a season to remember. I've shared my thoughts with you. I hope that your heart and your mind are still reflecting and thinking about some things that are important to you. What we could do now is take just a very few moments for a Q&A, but let's open up for 10 minutes or so of Q&A. You may have questions. Some of the questions.
Just a quick question for you.
Sure.
Having boots on the ground in Afghanistan
Right.
at the outset of the war, and seeing the events that occurred, what are your thoughts on current events happening in Afghanistan, today?
I knew that question would come up. I didn't think it would come up as the first one. I thought we would work into it, but as I said, the night that I got off the airplane at Rhino, I had already fast-forwarded my thoughts, okay, knowing that this was going to be years of policymaker decisions, not necessarily military decisions, but policymaker decisions about what to do in Afghanistan. We started Operation Enduring Freedom as a combating terror operation to hunt Osama bin Laden, to hunt al-Qaeda, and let me find a polite word, to take them out of the picture, okay? That mission, as you saw that I talked about larger conventional forces coming in and taking the handoff from the Special Operations Forces, began to mark a larger footprint. So in that time, between the first 120 days when it was a let's find terrorists, combating terrorism mission, it began to evolve into a nation-building mission, democratizing a country mission, which are all good things to consider in policy, but in order to do that, you've got to have a strategy in place, you've got to have the resources in place. I never saw, and this hopefully will be the most direct thing that I'll say today. I'm trying to, military officers don't have opinions, so. I was never quite sure we had a cohesive strategy it really changed every 2 years, regardless of which president was in or which party was in control of Congress or not. It changed every 2 years on an election cycle. So I think the question was, would we get out of Afghanistan? Yes. That to me was a foregone answer, because there are many military folks that said we should have departed within the first 2 years, because you took a very finite and lean military and turned them into an occupation force, which was just the wrong thing to do, I think, with the military. So the question was not would we leave. As we've seen things recently, the question was it's how we left, and I'll just leave it there. That was, as I witnessed that, it was disheartening. It was embarrassing for our nation. And again, I'm not going to direct comments toward any one person or anything. I'm just going to go, as a nation, we're better than that. And I think that's the best way I can put it. So, Michael Brandon, is that going to go into a news forecast? So erase that, okay. Okay, Laura.
Well, I have a question.
Okay.
You said that we were shocked, but we were not surprised.
Yeah.
How could our intelligence, were we not prepared with our intelligence for that day?
Yeah. It's easy to sit back and be a 20-year Monday morning quarterback, 20 years in the past. And that question has been asked and debated in a number of places. Personally, I think there were elements of information and intelligence that were available. There were probably analysts that were working on a domestic terror attack. I think information overload then becomes a serious factor when you're looking at intelligence analysis. So I think elements were there. Were all of the people in the right place at the right desk to put it all together to come up with terrorists are going to attack on the 11th of September at 9 o'clock Eastern time in the morning. They're going to commandeer 4 airliners. I think the information may have been there floating around, information overload. It was never synchronized, if you will, to make that kind of prediction. I mean, who would have ever thought that terrorists would take 4 commercial airliners, even though there was evidence that these folks were in our nation training to get their commercial pilot's license, but who would have ever thought that a determined group of terrorists would take 4 airliners and turn them into a weapon of mass effect? So So was that
Yes.
tap dancing enough to say, I think the information was there?
It was, it
You know,
was.
But I'm not going to second guess the great Americans who were trying to sort it out, so.
Right.
Okay, great question.
Did y'all hear her question? Why did you think it was so
Yeah.
difficult to find bin
Well, you know,
Laden?
that terrain that I described along the Pakistan border, rugged mountain peaks, goats have a difficult time even going through there, okay? To operate in that terrain, to operate where the mountain caverns created safe haven caves, without having any kind of real human intelligence, it was very difficult. And this is where bin Laden took safe haven, running between the Afghan and Pakistan border in those mountain peaks. And he also was a very, very smart terror leader in that he never carried his cell phone. He had a third level terror lieutenant that would carry his cell phone. So when you might be getting SIGINT or signals intelligence that UBL was active, it wasn't him. It was a mule. You know, his lieutenant was carrying that phone. He cleverly disguised himself from time to time. So it was very difficult. There were several occasions where intelligence said, we are sufficiently sure that he is there, but there was not enough information for whomever the leaders were at the time until finally President Obama said, let's pull the trigger, let's go in, and sent Navy SEALs in for that mission. So it was a difficult thing. So it was a matter of making sure you knew where he was in a very rugged environment. He was also very well protected by rings of people who would not disclose he was there. Because you've got to remember, we were trying to find him in an unfriendly neighborhood, okay? Yeah, well, terror leaders are good at doing that. As Colleen said, put family and friends, put a school around me, protect me. You know, so a very sly maneuver. You know, we took us years to figure that out. So, yes, sir.
Why do American people let these type of people over here in the first place?
Well, that's a good question.
Why they let them over here? I'm serious. Leave them over there. Let them stay over that way.
Yeah,
What
Cornelius said was, well, why do we let people like this get over here in the first place? And that's absolutely right. And after the attacks of 9/11, as you can all see now by the number of background checks, the databases that have now, part of the problem in connecting the dots on people who shouldn't be here were our conflicted databases from state to state with driver's licenses and other things where it was very difficult to track people. So Cornelius, thanks for that question. I think we've gotten better at it, but you know what? Going back to a determined enemy, a determined terrorist may still find a way to get here. Yes, sir.
Yes, I don't need microphone. Before there was that, bin Laden, back in the 40s, there was a friend of a guy that idolized Adolf Hitler. His name was Al Hussein. He was the original guy that inspired the hate there. And what Hitler did in Germany, he took it to the Middle East. Al Hussein.
Yeah. And began to create.
He inspired that hate
Yeah.
through Islamic radio.
Yeah, and bin Laden was a student of that, so absolutely. Good question. Yes, sir.
So knowing what you know now, would you change anything?
Nope. Other than in uniform, I didn't have a choice. You know, we basically executed the policy of the nation. Do I regret being there? No. I would still want to go and do what we did. I would still take our force forward to do what it needed to do. But I've learned so many lessons about the fragile nature of human life. I learned so much about respect for the human spirit and commitment. So what I would do differently is now take more time with, I feel like America's national treasure, and just make sure that they always know how much they're appreciated and how much they mean. And that goes on today. So, I mean, I've just, it makes you want to now take in and do things differently because things take on a very important meaning.
Us the difference between the Taliban and ISIS.
Yes, yes. The question is the difference in the Taliban and ISIS. First, the Taliban, even though they've grown more hostile in their activities, were a very strict Islamic religious sect that wanted to set up a national regime with very strict Islamic religious policies. ISIS is a later outgrowth of Al-Qaeda, so I'll get to them in a minute. But and the reason we begin to make that connection is Osama bin Laden understanding the mindset of the Taliban government. It was very easy for him to take Al-Qaeda into Afghanistan as a parasite to a very willing host. So the Taliban didn't start out as a terror outfit. They were a religious sect. And then the terrorists became parasites on that regime. The Taliban have evolved over time. They fight, okay, but they're really, a lot of their fighting is between themselves. And if there's somebody in their country they don't like, they're going to fight to push them out, okay? Now, Al-Qaeda being a parasite on the Taliban, fast forward as the Al-Qaeda began to splinter, and ISIS, the Islamic State of, was it Syria? I can never remember the whole acronym, ISIS, grew out of Al-Qaeda and then began to demonstrate its terror power in Syria and in Iraq, and now moving a splinter group into Afghanistan. So really what you've got in Afghanistan right now is the Taliban regime, very strict regime that now has more hostile intent than it used to have. ISIS, which is now migrated out of Syria into Afghanistan, and you've still got some of the original Al-Qaeda. So you've now basically got three hostile groups trying to fight for the same national space. And what we're seeing in some of that is that Al-Qaeda and ISIS may fight each other. So you've got to understand, Taliban is not synonymous with ISIS or Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda and ISIS are not necessarily synonymous, and neither of those two are synonymous with the Taliban government. So really three different snakes to deal with. Gerald.
Well, hey, Bob.
Hey.
Well, I think it was 2 years ago that Robin, which couldn't make it today, she thought it was tonight, she asked you a question, what keeps Bob up at night now? And I'm curious to see how that may have changed in 2 years.
The young people in our nation. Young people in our nation is what keeps me awake at night. As we've learned lessons, we've talked about attacks on 9/11, we've talked about war. What keeps me awake tonight is the fabric of our nation, and that's going to depend on the youth. So again, for us who can be wise enough and hopefully directed enough, we take care of making sure that we leave things in place so that the youth of the nation understand things and that they have a clear, and not a biased, but just a good, clear understanding. So, yes.
During World War II, we carved out bases all over the world as kind of a deterrent. And why was that not done in Afghanistan? Was it not possible?
Well, we had not, good question, we had not fought in Afghanistan. The Brits had, And that was a problem when the Brits came in as our allies. So there were some old airstrips there that the Brits had maybe used, years ago. But some of their wars there, airplanes were not around yet. What we went into for airfields were really the old Russian airfields. Russia had been there, trying to tame Afghanistan and occupy it, and left after 10 years. So really, the airfields that we fell in on at Kabul and Bagram and Kandahar and Mazar Sharif were actually old Russian airfields. So we just made use of somebody else's airfield. Well, we did. We had a very large base at Kandahar. Early in December in 2001, we went into Kandahar. It was a blown-up airfield. We had basically kicked Al-Qaeda and the Taliban out of that airfield. We took over that airfield, and it was, it was a pretty austere and desolate airfield. But we took it over and made it into a major air base. One of the questions recently was why we departed that airbase. And again, I'm just an old military guy and watch national policymakers make decisions and do what they do, but we left that airfield. It was an enormous air base by the time we left there after 20 years.
One more question. Do you have one? Okay. Maybe two more.
Okay, all right. Two more, okay.
When all this began on 911, do you think anybody in the military or the government envisioned that it would be a 20 years of fighting?
Well, I don't think so. I think strategically we short-sheeted the mission, the job, the task at hand. And in some ways, we may have never clearly defined the task. But that was what I was going about, that night that I stepped off the airplane and my thoughts began to fast forward. And I'm going, this is going to take a lot. In the next day or so of looking around, there's no industry there. Opium was the only. So how do you create a democracy out of this where tribes have been fighting for centuries? We don't necessarily understand the culture. What's it going to take to do this? We tried it in Bosnia, and policymakers thought that would take 7 years. Well, it didn't. It took 20. Okay. In Bosnia, we were dealing with a culture that we somewhat more understood, Eastern Europeans. Okay. In Afghanistan, we were dealing with a culture that, quite frankly, we were not prepared to strategically think about. So no, I don't think we were prepared or thought it would take 20 years.
I have a question back here.
Oh, okay. Hey, Robin.
Hey, Bob, good morning. Now that and you may have already answered this and I didn't hear it, but now that we have pulled out of Afghanistan, should we expect a reoccurrence of attacks not only in our country but around the world?
Well, yes. But again, this is a very determined enemy. The attacks on at the air base at Kabul 2 weeks ago that killed our Marines and a Navy corpsman, that was not prosecuted by the Taliban. That was prosecuted by ISIS. So yes, there will be more attacks. For me, just instinctively, I'm going to say they're out there right now trying to plan how to hit the homeland again. Don't expect it to be 4 airliners. There are other ways, and in some ways, horrific ways that we could be attacked. So, one more. Okay. Hi, Suzanne.
Good morning. Going back to December of 2001, when the Taliban had been greatly diminished and Osama bin Laden was on the run, at that moment, was the prevailing wisdom that if the United States left, they would all come rushing back, and that's why we stayed?
Well, that would be part of it, okay? Because while the original mission intent was to get Osama bin Laden and the Al-Qaeda terror leaders, we knew that we had to some way pacify, if we were going to continue to hunt, we had to pacify the Afghan society, and we also had to make sure that it would not be a safe haven for future terror groups. And again, that I think was the prevailing thought. But then that turned into the 20 years of nation building that we just hadn't thought out. Okay, so was it a wicked problem? Yes. Do I second guess? I could, but you know what? Again, at the level I was at, it was like, this is what we're going to do. We're going to do this. This is our mission. But all along, many military leaders questioned the strategy. Many that I talked to, even today, still go, we should have probably gotten out after about 2 years. So.
Bob,
Yes.
real quick, I wanted to invite everyone as you exit this morning, and we do have a couple more things, but I wanted you to take an opportunity to come to the front. Bob, upon his retirement, was presented this eagle, and it's the Apostleship of Chiefs, and for his service. And Bob has generously loaned this to the library to have on display in the genealogy room. His, I mentioned earlier his love for the community, his service to our country. And Bob, we just want to thank you for sharing this with our community. And I know the library is so appreciative of.
So thank you, but it's, Tracy, it's probably going to be more of a permanent loan. Okay, so. Yeah, the chiefs in my old my old tribe of Air Force Special Tactics, when I retired, a chief master sergeant is the highest enlisted rank. That would be like a command master sergeant in other services, or a chief petty officer. Gave me this as I departed the service. So it's a special meaning from special people. But I'll tell you what, it'd be better sitting here in the community than in my den or office somewhere. So. Reverend Looney, would you join me? Reverend Looney is a local pastor of the Reaching the World Bible Church, and on the board of directors of the Chamber. And Henry, I think it's fitting as a community leader that you dismiss us this morning. So,
thank you so much, Bob. I appreciate you. And just let me say this, as a Chamber member, as a citizen of Sylacauga, we thank you for your life and for your service to this nation, and we appreciate you sharing with us today, and God bless you for that.
Thanks. Thank you.
I'll be very short in my benediction. Lord, thank you for inviting me, and Dennis, Southern States. We appreciate you and everything that you all do for this community. And thank you for coming on this day of remembrance. As I was contemplating sharing, one scripture came to me that I think I'll read to you from Romans 13, verse 7. It says this: give everyone what you owe them. If you owe them any kind of tax, then pay it. Show respect to those you should respect, and show honor to those who you should honor. For our heroes and our warriors 20 years ago, this day of remembrance is honoring them. But I believe also you being here and us today, and even what we're going through with COVID, we should honor our heroes and our warriors today. And as General Holmes asked us to remember, one of the things that I remember so much and that inspires me today before I pray, and I encourage you, and I know you probably have that same memory, is the young man on the airplane that was over Pennsylvania, and he got the call from his mother. He called his mom, and she described what was going on. And that group got together. And as he said goodbye to her, you had to know in your heart he was probably saying goodbye forever. And then she heard him say to the group that was about to take that plane, and thank God they did, let's roll. What courage. My admonition for us today during COVID and during the difficulties that we face today in this world, this nation. I believe the United States of America is the greatest country in the world. But let's show that same type of courage as our heroes then and our heroes and warriors do now today. Let us keep them uplifted and support them in being a person of courage, godly courage today. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, we just thank you so much on this day of remembrance of 9/11, the impact that it still has on all of our lives that were changed forever. Holy Spirit, our Most High God, you know the end before the beginning ever starts. You told us that in the Word. Thank you for allowing us to grow to the empowerment. And Lord, help us to be honorable, peaceful, and loving to each other, but also forgiving and helpful, and stand strong with courage with everyone that we encounter. Lord, we thank you for this nation. We thank you for these citizens. And Lord, we thank you for your leading and guiding us. God bless you. God bless the United States of America. And thank you for being here today. Laura asked me to remind you again that as we close and as we have come to a closing, that if you all would take a water or a breakfast snack with you, please feel free to do that. And we thank you. Let's continue to remember this glorious day of remembrance for the rest of our lives. God bless you, and have a great rest of the day.